Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon for it's not afternoon yet, still this morning, almost afternoon, Lunch and Learn with the Seward County Chamber and Development Partnership. I'm Jonathan Jenk, and grateful for you all being a part of this topic. Before I get into the topic specifically, just want to thank our luncheon sponsors who help support luncheons throughout the year, both on professional development luncheons and lunch and learns like this one. Memorial Healthcare Systems, Cattle Bank and Trust, PetSource by Schooler, Jones Bank, Concordia University, Aspire Professional Group, Home Instead, Hughes Brothers, KTMX, Sewer and Licht Insurance, Tenneco, Walmart, Norris Public Power District, Heirs and Heirs, Rembolt Lutke, Chartwell's Food Services, Lincoln Premium Poultry, Pack and Save, Nebraska Equipment, Seward County Independent, Acres, Bryant Urgent Care, and Interstates. If we can give those sponsors a round of applause. A few upcoming events to engage with the Chamber here in the near future. We have our annual cleanup day coming up on Saturday, April 18th. We have a professional development, a business anniversaries luncheon on April 23rd, and we get to celebrate with our business community for 5-year increment anniversaries everywhere from I think 5 years this year to 155 years and everything in between. April 26th is the kickoff to Seward County Gives, and so we're really excited to support that important charitable effort throughout the county. And then May 15th, we're doing our first Civics Bee, partnering with the Nebraska State Chamber and actually the U.S. Chamber within the context of our 250th anniversary of our country's founding. They're wanting all 50 states to have a Civics Bee this year, and so Nebraska is one of the newer states. And so we're one of the regional sites for that. So we're excited. Actually, here at the Civic Center on the 15th, would welcome all of you to engage with that. We have 20 young people from around the region that will be participating to be then selected for the state competition. And then whoever wins that gets to go to the national competition in DC. So we're excited to be a part of that. With that said, this land bank topic, I think, is a really important one. And sort of the context for that. We finished our last housing study back in 2019. And, with housing studies, typically there's a lot of recommendations and you can't do all the things. But we've been able to make tremendous progress. As I reflect some on my own career, I started 14 years ago. We were building about 50 homes a year, housing units a year in Seward County. We looked at the last 5 years, we built over 100 housing units a year in the county. We've really been able to make some really great progress. So we've been able to use some new tools, things like the Rural Workforce Housing Fund that didn't exist back then or was just kicking off. We really leaned into that as a county. Land bank is not a new concept, as Kurth will share with us about, but it is something that's starting to be more adopted throughout our state. And so my encouragement to all of us as we think about updating our housing study, here this year, we actually have been selected through Nebraska Investment Finance Authority for their inaugural Communities for Housing program, which is modeled after the Communities for Kids program that had been run by the Nebraska Children and Families Foundation. But we'll be one of 5 in the state to be a part of that cohort, that initial cohort. As we're updating our housing study, I know that land bank will likely come back up. And so I would encourage us all to consider this as a potential tool, particularly to support housing diversification. Because what we realize is market rate housing continues to be pretty challenging with the costs involved. So we need to be creative. And a lot of times it's infill lots that I think what we'll call is the low-hanging fruit. And I think land bank in particular, that's one tool that we can use to engage with those vacant lots, as well as other ways that it can be utilized in the future. With that said, I'd like to introduce Kurth Brashear, who is an attorney for Rembolt Lutke. And I've gotten to work with Kurth a lot of years now, but grateful for his leadership in a lot of different areas. And he has direct insight on this topic as he serves as an attorney related to this in Jefferson County. So with that said, if we can welcome Kurth Brashear.
Okay. Good afternoon or good morning or good day, whatever it is. So happy March 31st to you. As Jonathan shared, I'm an attorney, a partner with Rembolt Lutke, which is celebrating our 30th anniversary here in Seward next month. So we're looking forward to that opportunity to, I hit the wrong button, to celebrate that occasion. What did I do here, Jonathan? I'm sorry, I missed.
Yep, I got
That's why it's sad when you need your readers to effectuate the controller.
Yep. So you just.
No, top and down.
Yep, you got it.
Okay. All right. So we're looking forward to pleased to be part of Seward. For 30 years, our main office is in Lincoln. 55 years ago, just this is a quick commercial, right, for Rembolt. 55 years ago, founded as a estate planning business and tax firm. Now over 30 attorneys, over 30 support staff. It takes a 1-to-1 ratio to help an attorney get anything done effectively. We say we're Nebraska's law firm. We have clients in all 93 counties in the state. Truly have colleagues of mine who are in Scottsbluff this week visiting. So when we talk about Nebraska and what can be beneficial to the state, we have some insight into that. And in case you're ever wondering or people ask what the attorneys in town do, we do everything except for criminal defense, so don't call me for bail, medical malpractice, or patent law. But otherwise, between our lawyers, we handle all of that. So with that quick promotion out of the way, at least, Nebraska Land Bank Act, and we want to talk about land banks a little bit today. This is not a new concept nationally. It's not even a new concept in Nebraska, but it hasn't really been available to communities outside of Omaha until the last 6 years or so. And so it's helpful to understand what the purpose of a land bank is. So the legislative findings, and this is the main one that really matters, is a tool to be utilized by municipalities to facilitate the return of vacant, abandoned, and tax delinquent properties to productive use. What does productive use mean? It means they're paying property taxes on them. They're taken care of. They're not subject to the negligence or nuisance violations, or they're being used for the public good, right? Park, economic development, housing, to develop housing, etc. But that's productive use. Properties that we know are not being used, they're the ones we all drive by all the time, and say somebody should really do something with X. That's what this is designed to do. So municipal land banks are public corporations. They're political subdivisions of the state of Nebraska, so they are subject to all of the Open Meetings and Public Records Acts. They are governmental entities, typically formed, and we'll get to that in 1 second, in an interlocal agreement. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But they are tremendously flexible. They have a flexibility, I think, that surpasses community redevelopment authorities, other housing authorities, because they can really acquire, hold, maintain, develop, lease, rent property, all in the objective of returning it back to productive use. So it is a tool in the toolbox of how do we try and address whatever the community that's involved might want to address with it. It's not just housing, it can be a lot of different uses. So when the act was first passed in Nebraska, it was done at the behest of Omaha to want to address a number of delinquent or unproductive properties in the eastern half of the city. And the original act really only limited it to Omaha and Lincoln. Or in Nebraska, we have a metropolitan class. Omaha is the only city that fits into that. And we have a primary class. Lincoln's the only city that fits into that category. It wasn't until about 5-6 years ago that cities of the first class, including Seward, cities of the second class, like Milford, villages like Utica or Beaver Crossing and the like, could start forming municipal land banks, and that's again done through an interlocal agreement. And that interlocal agreement is effectively the formation document, both governing councils, and there can be multiple, I'll just say both probably by default, but there can be 3 or 4 municipalities that partner together in a land bank. They negotiate that interlocal agreement. It's taken to the governing bodies for them to approve. Once they both approve it, that interlocal agency, the land bank, is then formed. In the case of a land bank, some interlocal agreements are for providing services. They don't have a governing body with them. A land bank is going to have a governing body that's set up. So it's a separate political entity established through an interlocal agreement. And I tend to refer to the municipalities who do that as they're the member municipalities of the land bank, right? It's the ones that it's serving. There are 5 right now. The 5th just came on board, but it's starting to pick up a little bit of momentum. Omaha, again, established in 2014. Then there's a pride of jostling to see who was the first outside of Omaha to do it, and there's disputed claims about that. But at least in terms of when they were organized, Southeast Nebraska Land Bank was the next in 2023. South Jefferson, which I represent, followed that. Northeast Nebraska, and then the most recent one is Western Nebraska Regional Land Bank, which was originally intended to be a land bank of Kimball, Gering, and Baird. But Baird apparently at some point decided it didn't want to be part of that, and so they just had their first formation meeting in December with Kimball and Gering. Another municipality that's tried to have a land bank is McCook. And McCook has talked to, I would say, almost everybody in southwest Nebraska to try and find a willing partner. And so far, they must not be an attractive enough candidate because nobody, unfortunately, has said yes. And that's one of the limitations of the Land Bank Act is you can't, unless you're Omaha or Lincoln, you cannot do this on your own. You need to have another municipality involved. Now, you'll see in most of the, well, in fact, all of them, I'd say, except for Kimball and Gering, you have a relatively large municipality, and then you have a relatively small municipality. Fairbury is just under 4,000 residents. Endicott is 120, right? Thankfully, Endicott saw that what's good for Fairbury and for housing and for development in Fairbury is good for Endicott, which is 7 miles outside of town. And so I think for a lot of these smaller villages, they've been willing to do it because it's good overall. Western Nebraska is the first one that's out. It involves communities in multiple counties. So there are no others right now that are like that. So what powers does a land bank have? It can lease property, although it's limited to a 12-month lease, so they can't engage in multi-year leases on property that they might acquire that has leases to it, but they can do 12 months lease and then do new ones. It can grant or acquire easements, licenses, leases, or options on property. It can enter into partnerships with nonprofits, joint ventures, and others to develop those properties. It can do effectively, and this is again the great flexibility in statutes, all things necessary to achieve the purposes of the land bank, which is again to restore property to productive use, right? So some of the benefits the land banks receive: when they are holding property, that property is exempt from property tax, just like any other public entity is. But once they convey title to a property, for the first 5 years, a portion of those property taxes get paid to the land bank instead of going to the governmental entities. So it's a way to provide funding to the land bank to sustain itself. The member municipalities are going to designate, they are required by statute to designate what their priority list for land use is within that municipality. So you might have a municipality that says, we want more public space, and we want you to acquire properties or use properties that are good for the public good. Others might say, we need more affordable housing. We want you to work on affordable housing as the highest priority, or we want multifamily housing. So they give direction to the land bank that board of directors needs to follow to guide its disposition. They can receive grants and apply for grants. They can take out loans with commercial lenders. They can receive gifts from individuals who might want to gift property or cash to the land bank. So they have a great deal of flexibility there. One of the real blessings is they're able to clear title. So once a land bank owns the property, and that includes past taxes that are owed, once a land bank owns the property, its board has the authority to wipe out all taxes, assessments, and other liens on that property. So it's a great way to unencumber property that has been encumbered for quite a while. And then just again, the flexibility. If you can conceive of ways that property could be developed or used, a land bank can most likely do it. Other than a 20-year lease, right? You can't do that. How is it governed? So you have to have at least 7 voting directors. There are non-voting as well. We'll talk about that in a second. Typically, and I think certainly best practice, usually what happens is in that interlocal agreement, when the 2 communities are agreeing to form one, they're listing who the initial directors are in that interlocal, and then that's what's voted on by the council members. the chief executives of the municipalities have to jointly recommend the board members. And both city councils have to, or village council and city council have to affirm their appointment. So, in fact, 2/3 affirmative vote. So there's got to be some coordination between the member municipalities of who's on that board. Right now, all directors have to be a resident of the member municipalities, and there are 6 or 7 experience qualifications in statute that they have to meet collectively between the voting directors, collectively between them, like banking experience, real estate development experience, Chamber of Commerce, and the like. That, frankly, is a bit of a challenge in some of these. Norfolk doesn't really have that issue with Hayter. Given 25,000 people in Norfolk, they can find those folks, right? South Jefferson Land Bank, we've had challenges occasionally. The 2 realtors in town may say, "Oh, I don't want to have a conflict of interest. I'm not sure I want to do this if I have clients who want to buy it." Well, if we've got to have a realtor, it's a bit of a challenge to make sure you have that covered, right? So that is something, this LB 1135, which is pending in the legislature now. It's the Urban Affairs Committee's priority bill. We'll see if they can do anything besides pass a budget, maybe. But if that does get enacted, right now, 2 amendments that LB 1135 would make. One is it would allow you to have residents from within the extraterritorial jurisdiction of the member municipality. So depending on the jurisdiction, that's 1 to 3 miles outside city limits, could be part of a land bank board. The other is it is modifying to say the board should ideally have folks who have this experience, but it's not required that they have this experience. That is going to make it much easier for at least the 2 in southeast Nebraska to find individuals who meet the qualifications to be on a voting member. And these are 6-year terms, by the way. Non-voting directors, so every municipality then has its planning director if they have one, or they appoint another official of the community to be on as a non-voting member, often the clerk of the village or somebody like that. They have a member of the governing council that's also a non-voting member, so both of them have, or at least both municipalities will have a member there. And then they can agree in the interlocal or elsewhere to have other non-voting members. I'm not aware that any of them have done that, just because you only need so many non-voting members, and these are the 2. The first 2 are required by statute. The rest is not. But then they're included in all board meetings as well. Stop me if there are questions. But otherwise, I'll keep going. So things in MLB, Major League Baseball, Municipal Land Bank cannot do, right? So it cannot exercise the power of eminent domain. It does not have the ability to do that. It cannot levy property taxes. It cannot issue bonds. It cannot acquire property outside of the city limits. Now, interestingly, 1135 has not proposed to modify that, even though it's saying you can have people who reside outside the city limits potentially on, but it cannot acquire property outside of. Land banks are limited in the sense of what type of property they can own. So generally, they are designed to own residential properties. They can own commercial, but there are limitations. So a land bank can't own more than 10% of the parcels in a municipality, and only 5% of the parcels that a land bank owns can be commercial. So a land bank would not be as helpful if there's a community where the business district is just abandoned and vacant, right? The land bank cannot come into that situation, buy up the entire 2 or 3 blocks, and then renovate those unless it's acquired a lot of other parcels, but not more than 10% overall of that community. So it really is more about residential. And then they cannot acquire a commercial property unless it's been vacant for 3 years, with one caveat to that.
How is that determined that it's considered vacant?
That's a good question, and that will be a matter of first impression when it comes up, probably. So the Act doesn't specify what that is. Nobody's really pushed it yet to see, but there will be a first if somebody challenges it. We'll find out. So that's not my lawyer answer. That's just the act doesn't cover some of those scenarios. So how can it acquire? We talked about this a little bit earlier. Gifts in exchange, foreclosure, purchase, or otherwise. Can do purchase contracts, lease purchase agreements, installment sale contracts, land contracts. There is that 100,000 threshold where there has to be an appraisal above that to make sure that the land bank is getting the value that it's supposed to be getting. Municipalities, political subdivisions can freely transfer property to a land bank, and we've had instances where the CRA will, or the city will, just give the land to the land bank and allow it to have that flexibility that the city or CRA can't necessarily have. The consideration is completely flexible. So there is to be consideration, but what that consideration is, maybe it's, we'll give this to you if you'll hold it for 5 years and then you'll develop it. I mean, a land bank could agree to that, right? That would not be a problem. This is probably the most significant one that the rural land banks are seeing, though, in terms of acquiring, is at sheriff sales. And this is a huge factor for everybody. At a sheriff sale, if there's no bidder on a property in a municipality that belongs to a land bank, by default, the land bank is treated as having submitted a bid, and it will receive title to that property. So South Jefferson, we've acquired probably 40 properties that way in the first year and a half because no one bid on them. But here's the other reason they didn't bid, is because what it does away with is the lowball bid. So the statute requires that it has to be the value owed on taxes. If it's not, that's what the land bank is assumed to have given. So someone cannot come in if there's $1,000 of back taxes owed and bid $10 to receive that property. They'll have to bid $1,001 to win the property. Otherwise, it will go to the land bank. So there are benefits there for the counties, for the municipalities, and others. It's either going to increase the tax collection for those municipalities from property taxes that haven't been paid, or it's going to end up with those properties in the land bank to handle as it sees fit.
Sure. So if one of the benefits is that the property taxes are then forgiven if the land bank acquires it, do they essentially buy that property for nothing then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because they'll acquire it at the sheriff sale. They're the default bidder, but then the board, not always, but I can't imagine the scenario when they won't. The board will then adopt a resolution wiping out all property taxes on the properties that it acquired. And they'll remain tax-free until the land bank actually conveys title to somebody else.
It's basically the magic reset button.
It is a magic reset button in a way.
And Kurt, I'm sorry, but you've said it, I just want to clarify.
Yeah.
The land bank can only clear title to public liens. So if there is a bank that has a lien on a property, a land bank cannot clear that. It can only clear public liens.
That is correct. And I wouldn't imagine that a bank would let a land bank get the property in those situations. But important distinction, yes. Yeah. So disposing of property, and again, here's where the land banks have a great deal of flexibility, is really what consideration do they want to require to purchase it. And so I'll just give you examples from South Jefferson, what that board has put into place. So you can just make a bid to the land bank to purchase a property from it, and the board will consider it like any real estate transaction. South Jefferson has created what they've called, well, in the shorthand, some would refer to it as a mow-to-own program, right? So if someone enters into an agreement with the land bank to care for a vacant lot for X number of years, then they'll receive title to the property once those X number of years have passed. Or they've also, South Jefferson has done some with builders who their consideration is, I will build a market rate house or an affordable house on this property of the land bank, and once I've completed that house, then the land bank will convey title to that so that developer is incurring no infrastructure costs, especially on an infill lot. They're just having to build the structure, but then they get title to the property and then can sell that property to somebody else, right? So, I mean, it could be an exchange, a transfer, a lot of different ways to do it. The other benefit is a land bank because it can pay for property, right? One of the things I think you'll see land banks starting to do is trying to collect. You might end up at a sheriff's sale with disparate, six lots on the same block, but none of them are contiguous to each other, where a land bank might look at that and say, well, here are the ones coming up at the sheriff's sale we think we might get. Let's make sure we acquire this one, and then let's try and negotiate to buy these two so we could put 4 lots together in a parcel and try and seek a multifamily, developer to develop that, versus those parcels would never come together otherwise, probably. So there are benefits there. And it can create different voting requirements and approval requirements. The municipalities can as well if they want to. How does a land bank get funded? So it's great to have an interlocal agreement, but you need money to do these things even when you're a public entity. So typically the interlocal agreement is going to say what the contribution is from the member municipalities. It may be a one-time contribution to kind of get it started and rolling down the hill, because again, the land bank can sell property, it can receive gifts of property, it can do other things later. Often you'll see that there'll be an initial funding contribution, and then there might be provisions in an interlocal that call for ongoing operating expenses to be allocated between the municipalities. Maybe it's based on how much property is held in each. There might be some minimum amount. And typically in these where you have a larger municipality and a smaller, you might have the larger municipality say, we'll provide all the operating for this. We'll have our city personnel act as the clerk for the land bank or cover those fees. It really is up to that interlocal agreement. Each project can be budgeted separately. If you had, for instance, where you have nonprofit partners or others come in, you might say this multifamily housing project, we're going to budget that differently than we do the rest of the land bank's operations. That's permissible as well. And then, the ability to have agreements like with a nonprofit, as an example. You can also have other municipalities come in. So especially where you have these villages, maybe you have a village in a larger first class or second class city do this, and then another village sees that it's actually doing something, say, hey, we would like to join. Typically an interlocal is going to talk about that, but if it doesn't, that other municipality could be added in as well. And again, there is no geographic limitation on where these municipalities are. So, the Gering and Kimball example is one of those. You could have a number between. This just couple, I'd encourage you, if you're interested in this, to look at, I think especially Southeast Nebraska has done a nice job with theirs, which they're really running out of the Fall City Economic Development Office is kind of taking the lead on servicing that or supporting it, but they'll have a list of properties that the land bank owns and how you can put bids in for them. South Jefferson, same way. You can see it has, you can click on this link and find about how to get its properties. This is its, that MODA own program, and how do you qualify for that or participate in that. Northeast Nebraska, not as much publicly available. So that's what I know. I would tell you it's been, once you get elected officials' heads around it a little bit, and they see how it can work, it tends to develop its own supporters and champions. It's that first step of why would we want to do this? And especially for smaller communities in the state, why do we have to partner with somebody else to do this? Why couldn't we just do it ourselves?
I was going to ask that question. Tell us more about the reasoning and why municipalities got partnered.
Yeah, right now it's because state law requires it. I think the legislature, at least back when they would have looked at it, would have said this is too much of a burden to put on a single community to do if it's not a metropolitan area community. Now, I will tell you, I disagree with that. I think any first-class city could certainly do this. I mean, Norfolk, Grand Island have no issues Seward could easily do this on its own. It has the resources to do it. I think there are, again, because right now you also have those qualification requirements. Practically speaking, and this is some of the legislation that was talked about this year, was maybe we just allow every municipality to do this on its own. It would be very difficult for, I suspect, B, to not picking on them, or Tamora or whatever, right? To just, we have 75 people in the village, we're going to set up a land bank. It's just not, there's a practical limitation on that, I think, as well. But from the legislative perspective, my understanding has been they kind of thought we need to make sure we spread the cost of this around some.
And Kurt is right. There is a bill advancing this on the second round of 3 rounds of debate in the legislature that is going to let every community have a standalone land bank. Because as Kurt explained, there was a lot of larger cities that said, look, we really can do this by ourselves, and we want that ability to do it. So we're hopeful.
Yeah. I think.
But the flip side of that coin is that you have the B that wants to do it, and then Seward says, like, now we're going to do this on our own. Do those small communities end up getting stuck without any leverage on somebody to be able to partner with them?
Well, I think what you might end up seeing is you could start seeing, because I think even if they can do it on their own, they're not going to, right? But you could have a network of, say, the villages in Seward County who would say, we're going to form one together, because all of us together can make this work from a functional and operational standpoint. The first-class cities, not an issue. The second-class cities could probably do it by themselves as well, at least the larger ones. But I'm not sure that I think actually experience, I'll just share from what I've observed in Fairbury, it has been beneficial for Endicott and Fairbury to do this together and create some formalization of relationship between the two communities and an understanding of really this is what's for the collective good of this part of the county. So there are benefits beyond what's just required, in my view.
So you mentioned about whenever elected officials kind of wrap their arms around something like this. Can you speak of like the Seward elected officials that you spoke with them, and how's our community?
Yeah, I have not. I talked with Jonathan about this just because I knew that housing study was coming up and saying if there's interest in a land bank in Seward County, obviously happy to be part of trying to at least educate people what it's about. So I appreciate folks being here today. I think it really depends on what the community views its needs are. My impression as a longtime Seward resident, speaking solely for myself, is I don't think we probably view our community as having a great deal of need for this kind of redevelopment. I will tell you that as city attorney for Fairbury, we deal with a lot of properties that we want to get restored to productive use, right? So I think it really, in a community that views itself as being fairly affluent and having owners who take care of their properties, a land bank may not be as attractive as in a community where I think it should be, I'm not sure it will be, as it could be in a community where they say, boy, we've really got this part of town where it'd be great to really try and clean this stuff up. But again, I think the flexibility of, where this hasn't been yet, that I'm aware of really moved to, is this ability to really compile properties together and create momentum for, say, multifamily housing or for an economic development parcel. That's where land banks, 5 years from now, I think you'll see that happening with those that have formed.
When you're talking about the funding, does the city have the ability to move funds around? Like, for example, I think like within the TIF group, there's a budget of money sitting there that really can't do anything. I mean, can they say, oh, okay, we want to move that from here and over into this land bank and fund that?
Yeah, part of it depends on how did the city acquire those monies and were they restricted further. I will tell you where at least I've usually seen this has been it's either general fund dollars or maybe a community had an infusion of unexpected funds that it didn't have in the budget, and it was suddenly, well, we could use that for this. Or it's some kind of allocation of monies that, at least under state law, could be moved to an entity that it is a participant in. So, community redevelopment and land banks in that regard if you can put it into a CRA, it's probably something you could do with a land bank.
Chris, could you just give us sort of a sense of size and scale of how much, like with the South Jefferson Land Bank, how much did they put in, relatively speaking?
Yeah, I mean, the benefit of all these being public entities is I'm not disclosing anything that's not publicly available. So South Jefferson started with seed funding of $150,000. I think as it would happen, I think the last housing study for Seward County, when I read through that, suggested that a budget of $100,000 to $150,000 would be appropriate to start one. I would tell you I would agree with that as at least seed funding. Now, speaking for my experience at South Jefferson, it has not spent more than $2,000 of that so far. It hasn't had to because it's acquired properties through sheriff sales and other things, and so they're really trying to be strategic of when they outlay those resources. But the communities are not making additional contributions at this time.
Can I just real life application for me, because that's how my brain works.
Yeah.
We had a situation in our community that there was a business that closed. The land was sitting for sale. There was conversations held. The taxes were paid. And I'm looking at Jonathan because he knows what I'm referring to, and I'm trying to be careful of how I say this. Could that have been an opportunity for a land bank looking at this now, where it was just...
So it would depend. If a land bank was looking to acquire that as one of its first properties, it's probably got some statutory limitations because it doesn't own enough residential yet. But I'm glad you raised that point. One of the things I should note is when they're acquired at sheriff's sale. So if there were 5 commercial properties at sheriff's sale that went to a land bank, those don't count. The caps on ownership don't count when it's acquired at a land bank. So if a property like that went through sheriff's sale, no one bid on it, the land bank received it, then it could own that and have that be the first property it owns, and it would not be in violation of the act. So it can be a tool, but again, those caps of what types of property it can own. Yeah. So my general advice would be you've got to acquire as many residential lots as you can, so that you then have flexibility for those commercial properties when an opportunity arises.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So like in the Fairbury one, I mean, they haven't spent a lot of money. Are you seeing their budget grow because of getting these properties and selling them, or they're taking more of the approach of we just want to develop and they're giving the land away for motivation of development?
They're doing alternative consideration, I would call it. So I think that has given them the flexibility to think about it that way, right? So if I can't speak for the board, my guess is if they didn't have 100,000 plus that it already had in funding, if a developer came and said, I'll build this, but I don't want to pay you anything for the lot and do any of the improvement, get it ready, I think they'd probably be less inclined to do that. They have the flexibility of saying, okay, fine, yeah, we'll do that. We'll give you the lot. If you build the house on it, that is the consideration. We need a new house in Fairbury, right? And so I think it does give them some. You don't want to starve a land bank, so it can have the flexibility to be strategic. I don't know that it requires a huge initial contribution to be, especially because you have multiple municipalities doing it. If each of them do a little, it's probably enough to get started. Any other questions?
I can waive liens on properties, if memory serves me.
Mhm.
So if it's
Any public liens or public assessments on property, it will wipe those out.
Do you have someone on staff at South Jefferson?
City of Fairbury provides the staff to do that. So Aaron Reimer and Laura Bedland at Fairbury are the main contacts on that.
John, you might know this, like when properties go through sheriff's sale in Seward County, do we have low-ball bids happening, or is there enough demand for the property that they're reasonably selling as is?
The political answer is it depends. I think certain parts of the county in particular, this is probably more suited for. But from a chamber economic development standpoint, we want as many tools in the tool belt as possible. And I think this is one of the specific tools that we haven't explored yet. And I really would like that ability to do that across the county.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would say if you think this is interesting, encourage elected officials to consider it. It is honestly not well understood or very widely known. That was proven again even at the legislative hearings that I attended of, just not understanding the basic mechanics of this. I would encourage you, it's flexibility and productive use, right? So it's how do we address in a flexible way properties that are not contributing anything to our communities right now. So
Could this be a county-wide thing or just pretty much just municipality?
the way the act is written, a county cannot be a participant in a land bank. So it has to be municipalities. So you're limited to the 526 municipalities in the state as the act is now.
But each municipality in Seward County could come together and form one.
They could,
The
yeah,
property is limited to within each of those city limits. You can't get rural areas.
correct,
But
correct.
the county could do it together. It would just be all the municipalities joining that group.
Right. And I think probably the limiting factor in that is who all wants a say on the board of directors and how does that fit in, right? So, but yes, they certainly could. They certainly could. Okay, thanks for your interest and your attention. Appreciate it.
As we finish up here, I want to give a couple of parting encouragements. As a part of this, I really do think this is a tool that we should consider in Seward County. I'm being unabashed about that. I think we've really laid some really good groundwork over the last decade for collaboration across the county. And so I think this potentially could be a manifestation of that. And so I'll plant that seed as some parting words per se. I also, just to share sort of our insider baseball as an organization, we've actually driven the entire county, all municipalities, and identified vacant lots. So we know actually in every municipality where the vacant lots are. We have a whole inventory of them. Now, we're not going to put that on the front page of the newspaper, of course. But the reason we have that is because we get calls from developers. Like in my inbox right now, I have 2 within the last week from housing developers that have said, I would like to develop in your county. And our struggle is, and we have good problems, I'll acknowledge that in Seward County, we don't have a lot of land available for development. We do have vacant lots, though, in multiple municipalities across the county. And I love the example that Kurth gave, which was you can actually potentially couple them together because most developers want scale. They can't justify an investment unless they could get 4 lots together or even 3 lots and turn it into 4 lots, hypothetically. So that's my encouragement as to why I think this is potentially a really good tool for us here, but it is going to take collaboration. I'm grateful to see some elected officials here in one of our shining star communities in the county. And I would just say, for those of you that have influence across the county, to have those conversations in other places and spaces, because I think we can lead in this area within Seward County as the municipalities would partner together. That would be my encouragement as you consider this moving forward, especially in light of updating our housing study. I think it's going to become even more apparent that this can be a really helpful tool to grow housing into the future as housing continues to be pretty expensive to build. So with that, thanks so much for coming. We'll look forward to engaging with you in future events. Feel free to engage with our office specifically on this topic or any others that we can be helpful with. So have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.